We're now ready to begin setting up controls, and we'll start with the neck and head. So I've made sure all animation has been removed from the eyelid joints, and we're ready to go in and start creating these animation controls. So let's go ahead and remove the weights manager. Feel free to leave your recent commands menu. And we'll move over to the side view so we can create a control for the character's neck. Now when creating controls, you want to make sure that they're easy to select. And also, we want to make sure they're very clear so we know without a doubt exactly what the control does. So this first control will be an arrow. Let's use our linear spline tool. It'll be an arrow that points to the character's neck. What I'll also do is enable grid snapping. So let's go ahead and turn off axis snapping. We'll just go in and create the arrow. So feel free to follow my lead. We don't have to spend much time designing these controls at all. Okay, great. So I think that's going to be just fine. If you would like, feel free to go to a few of your points and adjust the shape further, maybe add more thickness by grabbing these 4 points here, just scaling them out a bit more. And then next, what I do is head over to the perspective view just to check its size. So I'll go back to the rectangle select tool, so we can just bring this up just a bit more. Okay, great. Now next, we'll need to make sure that its axis is exactly where our neck root is, exactly where the object will control the neck from. Currently, that axis is right there at the center of our scene. So we can fix this by choosing Menu, Axis Center, Center Axis 2. Alright, I'll disable grid snapping, enable axis snapping, and let's go ahead and move this over to the neck, right there at its root. Now we can go back to point mode and drag the points back so it's easier to select this control. It's not going to do us any good tucked underneath the face. Alright, that's going to work out very well. Let's go in and rename this object. This name won't do us any good, spline. So we'll go ahead and give this a prefix of anim, and we'll use that same prefix for the rest of our controls because it's very clear. Followed by what this object will control, so that's going to be neck 01. We could also have this stored now in our controls group. Okay, great. So a few more things. We want to color code this object. That helps tremendously, especially when it comes to discerning between the right and left halves of our character. You can imagine if you're working on a very dynamic action and your controls are all over the place. Well, those color-coded controls help us to know exactly what's going on and what needs to go where. So with the neck control selected, I'm going to go ahead and move back to the Attributes Manager. And underneath the Basic tab, I'm going to go ahead and turn on Use Color and use a color of red for all controls in the center. And then for our left and right sides, we can go ahead and work with blue and yellow. Now, we'll also want to have this object stored in our controls layer. So I'll go ahead and take care of that. And then next, moving back to coordinates, we can make sure it is frozen. Let's go ahead and do that. Now, even if you decide later to restructure your hierarchy, which may change your transform values, it's still a good idea initially to go in and freeze your controls so you could get back to this state always. You could always get back to this position that you have placed the control in. Okay, great. Well, that does it for our neck control. We won't connect it to the neck rig just yet. We're just designing our controls right now. Let's go to move to the head control. Now for this, keep in mind we will have facial expressions and things like that. So we want the control easy to select, but we kind of want it out of the way. So why not create something that wraps around the character's head? So for this, let's go ahead and work with a 4-sided spline. Okay, now with axis snapping, we can go ahead and move this to the head bone. I'll also make this editable. We can go to point mode just to scale this down. It's way too large right now. I'll go ahead and just bring down the size. We can go to the points at the side of this object and scale them in. Great. Then I like to just design this a little bit more so we have a more appealing control. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull this top point back. I'll go to the lower point. I'm going to go ahead and drag that forward and bring it up a bit closer to the chin. However, keep in mind we will have a jaw control, so we don't want that too close. Great. And now for the points in the center, we can go ahead and just pull those back. And there we have it. Really neat head control. Okay, so next we can go ahead and rename this. That's going to be anim_head01. Let's have this stored in our controls layer. So we could actually do that from the Objects Manager. Simply clicking on this larger circle, you can choose Add to Layer, add the control. Great. We're going to group this object for our space switching feature we'll add. So the idea behind that is all of the connections we need for the space switch get added to the group above the animation control. That way we can freely go in and still animate on the control object. So another way to create a group is to do so from the Objects Manager under the Objects tab. Here is the group command, and the hotkey for that is Alt-G. So you can see that we have a null now added, and it shares the same axis as the object stored within it. So that saves us some time. Let's go ahead and rename this to NDRV for null driver, followed by the object it drives. So that's anim_head01. All right, great. Now, under the Object tab, we'll want to set the display here to none so that little dot doesn't appear. We're good to go there, and we can now have this stored in our controls group. Great. Checking our coordinates, let's go ahead and freeze this object, this group, and the head control is also fine. Now, as far as color coding goes, again, we can go ahead and work with red. We are now ready to set up our connections, so let's go ahead and get right to it. The neck root, that's going to be PSR constrained to our control. And the great thing is that the roots tied to our joints, naturally they're oriented to the world. Same thing as our control object. When that's created, again, it shares the same orientation. So what that means is we can set up a PSR constraint without any worry of the offset causing an issue with this connection. So as long as we make sure the axis of the two objects are right on top of one another, we should be good to go here. So what I'll do is go ahead and find the root of the neck. We might need to collapse our head root hierarchy. I'll go ahead and grab that object, go ahead and shift select our neck control, and now we can go ahead and create a PSR constraint under the character menu constraints, and here it is. Let's go ahead and rename this constraint. So that's going to be PSR constraint underscore followed by what it locks down. So that's root underscore neck 01. Now let's go ahead and take a look at this. If we were to grab the neck control, let's make sure only that's selected. As we start to move this, all right, everything seems to work just fine. However, when we undo back, there's a delay here. We need to update that by scrubbing on our timeline. Now, to remove this, we need to keep in mind that the order in our Objects Manager is going to determine how things are evaluated. So we need to make sure then that our neck is actually evaluated before the head by dragging that above the head's root. Let's go ahead and grab the root of the neck and make sure again that's stored above the head. And now when we go in and rotate that object, no longer is undoing an issue. All right, so we need to keep in mind that evaluation order. Another way to do that is to do that from the constraint itself, which we will most certainly need to do. All right, so let's go ahead and set up our next constraint, and this is to lock the head down, the head control, so that it is always going to follow the end of the neck, so there's no separation. All right, so with our head control selected, we can now go in and select the end of our neck chain, BE neck. Let's control click that, and we'll use a position constraint. There it is. Let's go ahead and rename this constraint. That's going to be POS constraint underscore anim head. Great. Now, remember, thinking about the order of evaluation here, what we'll do is go ahead and test this out by grabbing the neck control, moving that around. When we undo back, you can see there's a delay. So we know how to correct that already. We just need to make sure that the tag here gets evaluated after the neck. So that's going to be expression 1, simply because the neck currently is expression 0. All right, so when we go ahead and move the neck around and undo back, again, everything's working just fine. So the next step then is to lock the root of the head. Let's go ahead and find that. We need to use a different tag here so we can make sure that that is going to be locked down to the animation control that we've created. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just remove this constraint tag. It was only there for a temporary fix anyway, so we can get an idea of the rig we're trying to create. All right, so with the root selected here, we'll now go in and select the head control and use a PSR constraint. Let's go ahead and rename this to PSR constraint underscore root head 01. Thinking about the evaluation of this, again, we'll want to set the expression here to 1. And now the last thing we'll need to do is set up a constraint that will help us get that space switching that we saw earlier on. All right, so that's going to involve a rotation constraint between our group object and the neck control. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll grab the group of our head control, and then we'll go ahead and grab our neck control and create a rotation constraint. All right, beautiful. So watch this. When we go ahead and grab the neck and start to move that around, notice the head will follow. But once we go in and set that weight of the constraint, let's go ahead and find that. There it is. Once we set that weight to 0, I'll just go ahead and do that from the strength. Now when we move the neck, only the head's position follows. That's exactly what we want. I'm going to go ahead and crank the strength back up to 100%. And I'll also make sure that the constraint is renamed, and we'll stop the lesson after that. So that's going to be ROT constraint underscore NDRV anim head 01. All right, beautiful. So we've made great progress in this lesson. In the next lesson, we will set up the space switching feature.